Welcome. The Walter Durham Lecture Series has been a real blessing for this library. A lot of people thought greatly of him and were very generous in their memorials. So we, the Friends of the Gallatin Public Library, initiated this lecture series, and we're now in our third year. So I appreciate you coming, and I serve on the committee to get speakers for the lecture series, which is traditionally 4 weeks in October and 4 weeks in April. So I would like to let you know that one of the suggestions for a lecture series was to have someone speak about the cemetery tour. And my friend Ken Thomson agreed to come tell us how he selects these people we memorialize through a cemetery tour, which is the first Saturday in October, and it's from 4 to 8, and he's going to let us understand the process that he goes through to select these people, and the ones who are reenactors, and their speeches and their costumes, and all of this benefits the Sumner County Museum. So many of you are here because you got this printout of our lecture series and have read about Ken Thomson and his historical perspective on anything about Gallatin and Sumner County. So he's currently president of the Sumner County Historical Society. He's on the museum board. He is on several other committees and commissions that have to do with history. So I will present to you Ken Thomson.
I'm also the county historian.
Oh, the county historian. Has
And
there
chairman
been
of the City Historical Commission.
the City Historical Commission? Well, I didn't know that. Thank you.
Okay. Can you hear me?
No.
We'll move up to this chair. I'll move the lectern a little closer.
Turn up the volume.
Well, I'm going to save the best to last over here. Ryan is our museum director. Can everybody hear me okay? Okay. To be ignorant of what happened before you were born is to live the life of a child forever. Think about that. It took us 7,000 generations to get to this point in time. And I'm looking around, people in here, 7,000 generations. Some families could have done a little better, you know. The earliest people came here about 1780, and of course they started dying, or they were killed by Indians, one or the other. And there were three places of burials that developed. The first one is you were buried on your farm. And one of the early cemeteries is the Hall Cemetery at Castaigne Springs on Governor Hall Road. I'm sorry Sam Gilmore's not here because he knows all about that. And some very early people were buried there in the 1780s. And then the second place people were buried was a church graveyard. And the earliest church here was the Presbyterian Church, Shiloh Presbyterian Church, out here on Hartsville Pike, behind Dr. Enoch's Animal Hospital, and that cemetery is still on that hill. And then in 1802, Gallatin was organized, and Felix Grundy gave us an acre to initiate the cemetery in 1814. And the earliest marked grave in that cemetery is 1818. But in the beginning, it was not called a cemetery, it was called a graveyard. They didn't call them cemeteries until the 1830s. And this came from Europe, and the first cemetery in the United States was in 1831 in Boston. And it was Mount Auburn Cemetery. And the cemetery the word cemetery means sleeping place. And they made parks out of graveyards, and that's when they started calling them cemeteries. And they had landscape architects to design those cemeteries. All timelines are based on wars. And so I'm going to sort of start out with veterans from all wars being buried in the cemetery. And there are 4 markers to Revolutionary soldiers in the Gallatin Cemetery. One of them is a cenotaph. Anybody know what a cenotaph is? That's a marker when nobody's there. They don't know where he's buried. Zacchaeus Wilson was marked by the DAR, and they just put a marker in the cemetery to him. There's no Revolutionary soldiers originally buried in the cemetery. All of them are transfers. And William Gillespie and James Trousdale, from whom they bought the land for the city, and James Odell, all transfers from their farms to the cemetery at some point. The War of 1812, Governor William Trousdale, Colonel Greenberry Williams are 2 buried there from War of 1812. Seminole War, Second Seminole, 1836, Josephus Congill, Dr. James Franklin, William Trousdale again. Mexican War, 1848, James Trousdale again, William Trousdale. He was in so many wars, they called him the War Horse of Sumner County. And he was upset because he couldn't go to the Civil War because he was in his 70s, but he was too old. Of course, we have veterans from all the other wars buried there, and I won't get into that. The markers in this county, they never had slate here. They had slate in the east in the 18th century, but here they used limestone to begin with and then went to marble. After the Civil War, they had equipment to cut granite, so they made granite markers after that. In 1820 to 1847, Lewis Crump made all the markers in the Gallatin Cemetery. He built the mausoleum at Fairview. It cost $2,700 in 1847. And he died before it was completed. And I think we're pretty sure he built the mausoleum at Craigfont that Mr. George Wynn took down in the 1920s. And I gave them a picture of that recently. They didn't have a picture of it. All the cemetery records for the Gallatin Cemetery burned 70 years ago, and all we had was a burial book. And that old burial book is in the archives in Nashville, and it's from 1850s to 1880s. So I decided once I would get a copy of the cemetery book and compare it to the burial book for that time period and see how many people did not have markers, and 50% of them did not have markers for that time period, that 30-year time period. There are thousands of people buried in that cemetery without markers. And I've been told in the past people buried on top of each other, years ago. If you have a marker on your lot, you can find the lot. If there are no markers on that lot, you don't know where it is. And one good example is Colonel Greenberry Williams, whom we did in the cemetery tour this year. We don't know where that lot is. There's a marker on, I had a marker put to him on one of my lots, and his son too. But we don't know where that lot is. But we have the information who's buried there from the burial book. And somebody asked me when the cemetery was integrated. Well, before the Civil War, the slaves were buried on the lots with the family. And it's in the burial book. Listen. Cemetery was expanded many times. Across the railroad track was Spencer's Choice Farm, and when the Millers died, the family sold 7.5 acres to the cemetery. That's the largest section of the cemetery, and they have the biggest lot in the cemetery. Many small portions have been purchased through the years, and I'm not going to get into that. The Miller family have the biggest lot, Boyer's second largest. 1872, the street committee instructed to set apart ground for Negroes. 18 February 1872, infant of Henry Jones Colored buried. Guess how much it cost to dig the grave? 50 cents. His wife died 2 days later, and they charged $1 to bury her, dig the grave. 1873, they had a cholera epidemic, and in 1 month's time, they buried 109 people. It is said they buried some of them in a mass grave. 30th of May to the 8th of July, there were 61 paupers buried that year. 19th of February 1880, the city hired a landscape architect to redo the cemetery. And I don't know who they hired, it wasn't in the minutes. 1880, the colored Oddfellows bought lots. Does anybody not know what the Oddfellows were? The Oddfellows were a fraternal group similar to the Masons, and almost as big, and they owned Howard Female College, that was named after the Howard Lodge. And they organized in Europe and England to help widows and orphans. And it was a large group.
Are they connected with the Rebeccas now?
I don't know whether they are or not.
There's an huge organization called Rebeccas and
Yeah,
Oddfellows.
I've heard of them, yeah. I don't know what's going on. They still exist, but I don't know any chapter around here or anything. I mean, they've kind of died out. Now coming to the cemetery, Donna Smith was director of the museum 23 years ago, and she came up with the idea to have the cemetery tour. And she and Barbara Parker, who just died, initiated that, bringing to life the residents of Gallatin City of Silence in order to live the legacies of those who came before us. And hopefully, they thought this would inspire the living to create their own legacies. Actors portraying in the first person and in period costume those who laid the foundation upon which we continue to build this town today. All characters are pieces of Gallatin's never-ending puzzle. A multiplicity of personalities have been portrayed between the cradle and the grave, and First Lady of a foreign country who never went there, to a lady who murdered her lover. Who's the First Lady of a foreign country who never went there? Liza Allen. She married Sam Houston. There he is. Sam Houston's first wife was, of course, First Lady of Tennessee, because he was governor when they married. And then he was run out of the state, and William Hall became governor. 8 years later, he was president of the Republic of Texas, and she was still his wife. So she became First Lady of the Republic of Texas. He divorced her to marry Margaret Lee, who became First Lady of the Republic of Texas, and then First Lady of the state of Texas when he became governor. So they had the same roles, just reversed order. And of course, you know who the lady was that murdered her boyfriend. Anna Dennis Dotson. Yeah, she had an affair with Ty Cobb. He's written up as Charles Cobb, but the papers I have called Ty Cobb. And of course, there's been a book written about that that's full of mistakes. But when that book came out, I had to answer many telephone calls from people who bought the book, couldn't understand what was going on. And the house she lived in is still there. In the book, it said she lived in a house with twin towers on North Water Street. Well, it's not so. The house is still there. It's in the last house before you cross the creek to Broadway on the right, off of the square, stone house. Okay, if I can get this thing to work, I don't know where John went.
It's right behind you.
He's right behind me. Oh, okay. I just want to make sure this, oh yeah, he's hiding. We're going to take a quick tour through the cemetery, and then you're going to hear from Ryan. I remember how to operate this. Because this is the entrance to the cemetery, and John Marshall Cantrell and Louis Miller Woodson and Charles Brooks Brown were the committee that had these erected, and they were made in Bowling Green, Kentucky by M.S. Funk. James Trousdale. The town of Gallatin is built on his part of his land grant. They bought 42.5 acres, and the reason they bought it is because there was a big spring where the jail is now, and that's why they're located on this spot. It was an everlasting spring. He was buried on North Water Street. It's now Avenue. 4 doors north of Reggie Mudd's house, right across from the Catholic school. There's a 50s ranch house built on the site of his house. And this was in the backyard. He and his wife were in the backyard, and these were moved to the Gallatin Cemetery in the 1940s. We did Greenberry Williams and cemetery tour this year. How many people went to the cemetery tour this year? Okay. A few delinquents in here. Greenberry Williams, I told you couldn't find his lot. He's buried there somewhere, but I had this put on one of my lots. And he was born in 1778, died in 1874. He lived a long time. He was the great racehorse man. If it hadn't been for him, Sumner County would not have been #1 in the United States from 1800 to 1845 in racing. But he was involved in it over 70 years. And he was the #1 turfman in Sumner County. He lived where McDonald's is. That was his farm. Went to Red River Road and all the way up to Maple Street. There was a big house on the hill up there where Epic Center is. Big brick house. That's where he lived. And there's a long story behind all this. I won't get into it, but anyway, he's one we did in the cemetery tour this year. This is Molly Gardner Herring. And this is the only marker in the Gallatin Cemetery with a War of 1812 real daughter seal on it. Her father was in the War of 1812. Well, grandfather was in the Revolutionary War, James Franklin. Cullen Bryant Gardner was her father. He was in the War of 1812. Her brother was in the Mexican War. Her husband was in the Civil War. And she had clothes from all those people and made a quilt. And she belonged to the Daughters of 1812 in Nashville. And she gave them that quilt. I don't know what they did with it, where it is, because she died in 1935. She was born in 1834. But she went to the Nashville Female Academy. Not Nashville Female Academy, she went to Bledsoe Female Academy at Castaigne Springs. I have all of her textbooks. She graduated in 1852 and I have a diploma. And then in the 1850s, I have all the invitations to parties and balls and things she was invited to, which are really interesting. And I need to do a lecture on her sometime, because she was a fascinating character. And during the Civil War, of course, Rosecrans camped in her front lot out here on Scottsville Pike. And she had a dog named Manassas. Well, the Northerners soldiers didn't like that because they called it Bull Run, and they lost, you know. So they told us she didn't change the name of that dog, they were going to kill it. So she went out one day and called Manassas, and they killed the dog. And she leaned down, picked up the dog, and turned to walk away. Said, "I'd rather be a dead dog any day than a damn Yankee." And I said, "I bet she outlived them all." She lived to be 101 years old. She had the last word. But
where was her house?
it was on, well, she grew up out on Scottsville Pike. The house is gone. I have pictures of it. It was a log house. Her mother was a sister to Isaac Franklin, Fairview. Her mother was Sarah Lauderdale Franklin, married Cullen Bryant Gardner. Don't get me started on this. I can go off in all directions. But this is when she died, and they used to pass these out to all the businesses in town.
So
And,
they were passed away, not obituaries?
they put obituaries in the paper,
Oh,
but this is just an announcement of the funeral.
okay.
We got pallbearers and honorary pallbearers, and I knew most of these people, and so did Kerry. He should have known a bunch of these people. Can you read that? Yeah. Okay. And this is the first marked grave in the Gallatin Cemetery. This is Neil McAuley. He came to visit his brother from Ireland and died in 1818. And there's probably people earlier than that buried there, but he's the earliest marker we have. And this is another early burial notice. The friends and acquaintances of Ms. Dr. W.P. Rolls, William Penn Rolls, hereby informed that she will be buried this afternoon at 3 o'clock, 1836. They lived in Trousdale Place. They owned the Trousdale Place before the Trousdales did. Of course, John H. Bowen built that house in 1814, and they bought it when they came to Gallatin. Her husband was a Methodist minister. He was the president of the female college and owned the newspaper. And he had a number of wives and lived all over the country. So this is a wife that died while he was living here. And a child died too that she had.
Why does it say she is not dead in that picture?
That's an old saying. You know, she, I mean, you used to put it on tombstones.
Oh, I see. So
You used to put it on tombstones. She is not dead but sleepeth.
Oh, okay.
I was there, I know. Okay. This is Eliza Allen Houston Douglas, Sam Houston's first wife. I've already mentioned her. She lived, grew up where the steam plant is. That was John and Letitia Sanders Allen farm, called Allendale. And her home, and I have a picture of it, was behind the Guthrie building on West Main Street. I don't know what W. and Robertson Furniture Company was in that built that building. And it's got some kind of children's store in there now. But anyway, that's where she lived. This is Governor Trousdale's monument in Gallatin Cemetery. And his father, of course, moved there, and mother on the same lot from North Water Street. This is Judge Josephus Con-Gill's family monument, the two down there. But this is where he's buried. I won't go into detail about some of these. This is Patrick S.B. Urey. He's from the Francis Urey family. And the bed at Craig Font, I will tell you this, the bed, and I don't know what they say now because I haven't been on a tour there in 50 years, but the bed in General Winchester's bedroom at Craig Font belonged to Francis Urey. And General Winchester never saw that bed. It wasn't made till after he died. He died in 1826 and that bed was made in the 1830s. But the Ureys were a very wealthy family here. This is the Mexican monument. Before it was restored in the late 1930s, you can't see, but on each side it's fallen in. I have some other pictures of it falling in. Molly Gardner Herring, Bledsoe Female Academy, whose monument you saw, the War of 1812 marker. This is her daughter, seated there. And this is the Mexican monument as it looks today. And 20 years ago, I was president of the Historical Society, and a number of people there had all these plates replaced in there and recarved and everything where you could see them. They're already stained. It cost $20,000 to replace those plates. Peter Bertrand. How many people know who Peter Bertrand is? Okay. Okay, so I'm gonna have to, I've got a 2-hour lecture on him. You want me to do it right now? Briefly, Peter Bertrand was born in Edmonson County, Kentucky. That's where Mammoth Cave is, on the Green River, to a white mother and a mulatto father in 1840. And in those days, if a white woman gave birth to a child of color, she had to give it up to the court at age 5. So she made arrangements for the child to go to his mulatto father's white father, Jacob Bertrand. And they reared him. And he went to the Civil War, and you'll see another tombstone in a minute with an uncle, the half uncle he went to the Civil War with as bodyguard and cook and part-time nurse. Anyway, after the Civil War was over, he came to Gallatin because he had 2 uncles living here. They sent him to Roger Williams University. He became a minister. He was the second pastor of the First Baptist Church on Winchester Street. He was head of the educational system for the African Americans here. And when he died, you'll see his son-in-law's monument here in a little bit, Dr. Rucker. Dr. Rucker took over as superintendent of the black schools, principal of the high school, pastor of the First Baptist Church, and was a doctor and practiced medicine out of the high school office. This is his Civil War marker. He was in the Confederate Army. And his last daughter was Lily Bertrand Odom. And in her old age, I got her a pension from the UDC. She got a pension from the Widows and Orphans. And this is Peter Bertrand. This is his third wife, Dora. And she taught school 54 years, I believe. And they both left autobiographies, which are wonderful, you know. This is Samuel Fox Shell. We did his wife, Mary Shell, in the cemetery tour. And she's the one that wrote the diary we had published a year ago, Historical Society. You can't read her marker. Well, that's her marker. I rubbed it off a little bit, but it needs to be cleaned, and we're in the process of doing that. Cleaning the markers down there. This is John S. And John S. lived in the house on Franklin Street beside Christian Towers, that big old house that's still there.
Mm-hmm.
He didn't build it, but he later owned it. And he was a Frenchman, came to the United States during the Civil War into New York, and they impressed him on the street. And they tried to find out what his name was. He said, "John is my name." And they put down John S. The S wasn't his last name, but he took that name. And when he came through here with the Yankee Army, he liked it, so he came back and married here twice. And there's a new book out on Ghost of Gallatin, and in there is a picture of his first wife's tombstone. Her name is on the other side of this one, Tennessee is, and it's on under the back step of that house on Franklin Street. And they didn't understand why it was there. I said, well, he replaced the marker in the cemetery before he died in 1902, but he replaced it. And he just took it home, put it under the back step, and it's still over there. They thought she was buried under the back step, you know. But anyway, he was a town baker. And this is Martin Barth. He came from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. We have done him in the past. We didn't do him this year. But he taught Andrew Carnegie the Morse code when Andrew Carnegie was a little boy in Pittsburgh. And he came to Kentucky and ended up in Bowling Green, and he got grabbed by William Tecumseh Sherman, and telegrapher, and he took him on a march to the sea. And when he came back, his brother and sister-in-law were living here, so he came here was a station agent and telegrapher, and had the first telephone in Gallatin. And somebody asked me, who did he call? I wonder who did that. It was John over here. I said, he called himself, I guess. This is the Fitzgerald Monument. You know, the Fitzgerald house was Monell's restaurant out here. Old man Henry Fitzgerald, Irish immigrant. He sold saltpeter to both the North and the South, made money during the Civil War, and during the war he came here, and there was a big cotton factory on Factory Lane. He paid $25,000 for it. It had a hotel there, and they lived in the hotel till they got their house built after the Civil War. But the Tompkins were one of the owners of that cotton factory that he bought, and the Boyers, Ms. Elizabeth Boyers, who lived on this site where we are right now. And this is Dr. Jesse Head Johnson's monument, and this is the second tallest one in the cemetery, and he lived out at Sideview, the next house past Shiloh Church. The old house is still there, sits way back. And he had one old maid daughter, Mary Lucy, and she had quite a reputation. If you remember, how many remember Nanny Dunn, Joan Draper? She went to the Gallatin Church of Christ, and so did Mary Lucy. So she called her Cousin Lucy Johnson. She said nobody liked Cousin Lucy Johnson, but she's covered up with diamonds, and she said, I sat with her every Sunday. But she left her money to a bunch of little children, and some of them in the Reese family, when she died in the 20s. But she was a very interesting person. I have her portrait in my house. She died in 1926, I believe. But anyway, she was so tight, when she'd send somebody to the store with that side view, if it was 10.5 cents, she'd take a hatchet and chop the penny in half. She wasn't going to give them that extra half a penny, you know. This is Alfred Moore Burney. He was Cumberland Presbyterian preacher and president of Howard Female College. And the church building is still standing next to the Anderson Funeral Home. Craig Apartment was a Gothic church at one time, had towers on it. And Mr. Craig remodeled it and made an apartment house out of it. But that was his church. And house was next door at one time was the parsonage, and they moved it around on College Street, that little cottage on College Street, that was next to that building at one time, and moved it. The most photographed building in the county, first 50 years of the last century, built by Katie Trousdale, and she put it in her uncle's name that raised her, Benjamin Franklin Allen, who was the brother of Eliza Allen Houston Duggan. Then she bought it back from his children for $1 after he died. But she inherited the land from her great uncle, who was Miss Trousdale's brother, John Langley Bugg, and she didn't want to name it Bugg Hall, so she took the middle name, Langley, named it Langley Hall. But it was the largest house in Sumner County. And everybody got upset when Alan Gill had it torn down. His wife didn't want it torn down, but he said it was his house and she couldn't do anything about it. And this is the Trousdale Monument that Katie had put up. They had to build a spur railroad track to bring it into the cemetery. And the Odoms also on there. Her mother was Ellen Odom and her grandfather was Eli Odom, and that's where she got all the money from her grandfather Eli Odom. And he didn't lose anything during the Civil War. He was an old man during the Civil War, but he kept all of his northern investments. He was a smart man. And he died and left her the richest little girl in the county. She was about 3 years old when he died at 79. And he left her millions. And her father took care of it and preserved it, and they kept up the whole family. Everybody was on hard times, and during the Depression, she gave every cousin $50,000 apiece during the Depression. She owned the First and People's Bank. She married the president of the bank, who didn't have anything, W.Y. Allen, and he left $10,000 when he died in 1940. But he was president of her bank. So she didn't marry until she was in her 40s because she didn't have any children. But her mother died in childbirth, and her grandmother died in childbirth. She didn't want to die in childbirth. Now this one, monument, you'll see the whole history on. This is Judge William Hall and Mary Random Mentlow Hall. And of course she was the daughter of James Alexander Mentlow of Oakland and the granddaughter of General Daniel Mentlow, Daniel Wade Mentlow. And William Hall was the son of William Harrison Hall and Sarah Winston McDaniel. And his grandfather was the governor of Tennessee. William Hall succeeded Houston as governor. He didn't want to be governor, but when they got rid of Houston, he was next in line of succession. He was Speaker of the Senate, and that was the line of succession at that time. And his father-in-law, William Alexander, gave him a gold watch. And they all were in the racehorse business, so it has a racehorse engraved on one side, and I have that watch from 1829, and it's pictured in that Rock Castle book that we did several years ago of all the homes. Saved by the bell.
Kenneth,
Okay.
Kenneth,
Yeah.
why did they run Houston out of town? I'm not sure I know about that.
Well, she left him, came home,
Yeah,
and they were afraid that he was going to say something detrimental to her character. And they had a committee organized here to investigate her morals in Gallatin. And they found nothing wrong, no wrongdoing by her. But he was mean to her and locked her in the room at the hotel in Nashville and all this kind of thing. So they made it so hot for him that he left town, and he dressed like a woman and got on a steamboat and left Nashville. And when he got to the wharf at Clarksville, her brothers were waiting for him. And they made him promise he would never say anything against her. And he didn't. So that's what happened. It was a politically motivated marriage to begin with. She didn't really want to marry him.
was there any truth to the rumor he had a festering wound that she just
Oh yeah,
couldn't?
he had that too from War of 1812, yeah. He had but it didn't seem to bother Margaret Lee.
Maybe it was well believed.
Don't know. This is where William Hall bought the lot in 1899 when his wife died. Doesn't have too much information on it, doesn't even say what size. And this, he paid $27.25 for it, and it's a lot, and it's got a bunch of spaces on it. Probably 12, I don't know, but I think 12 spaces. $27.25. And this is where he had the grave dug for $5. W.T. Wells was the head of the cemetery at that time. And this is where he ordered the monument you just saw, and it cost $225 in 1900. And it's Oglethorpe, Georgia blue granite. There's no telling what that marker would cost today, how many thousand. But I've got all the documentation on it. Flora Head, wife of Dr. John Luther Vertrees. He was the man with whom Peter Vertrees served during the Civil War. And Flora Head came from side view out here called Greenwood. The house was called Greenwood, now owned by the Reese family. All lived in that house, that big brick house. There's an old house there where her parents lived, Dr. James Marshall Head, and her mother was Barthenia Parmelia Branham. And her mother and Lucy Johnson, I showed you the big marker across the road, Mary Lucy Johnson's mother was Cornelia Ennis Branham. So they were sisters. But anyway, we did Flora Head in the cemetery tour this year. And her brother was mayor of Nashville, James Marshall Head Jr. A long time ago, of course. And her husband buried in Kentucky, Brownsville, Kentucky, where they all came from. He was buried up there. They were divorced. This is D.K. Spillers. David Kelly Spillers. He had his store on North Water, where the Gibson Furniture Store is, the double brick building. And he was an importer, imported things from Europe and Japan, and artwork and all kinds of things. It was a fabulous store for its day and time in the 1870s, 80s, and 90s. But he had one thing done that has come to my attention many times, and that's a plate about this big with a insert in the middle of Albert Gallatin. And I've gotten letters through the past 60 years about those plates from different people all over the country. And people from Nashville would come up, different places. Well, this one couple came one day, this has been 40 years ago. It's German Majolica, it was made out of, and they were made in Germany. And so this couple came and I said, well, I'm always interested to know where you got this plate. And they said, in Germany. I said, we went to a estate sale in Germany, and the guy collected one-of-a-kind plates. And that's where we found it. And they couldn't believe they found a Gallatin plate in Germany. And I said, well, that's interesting. That's where they were made. You know, it's the one that never got over here. He gave them his premiums. W.G. Schamberger, we did him in the cemetery tour this year. We did George Schamberger. He owned the building right across the street, the old Sumner County Bank building, and the big building beside of it where the Opera House was upstairs. He had a big house up here where the used car lot is at College Street. And his parents were Prussian immigrants, John George Schamberger and Helena Leopold Schwab. And his sister was Ms. Winchester Wynn at Wynwood, Dora Schamberger Wynn. Mary Body Patterson. Mary Body Patterson, whom you should remember, lives across the street from you diagonally. You hear me?
Yeah, but I don't recall which Patterson.
Mamie. Well, she lived, you know, the Ramses lived here
Yeah.
in the street, Westland, and then her house was on the corner there.
On the corner.
She's Mary Ralston's great-grandmother.
Across where Dr. Patterson later lived.
Well, he lived farther down, the next block.
Oh.
But Mamie lived in that house. Anyway, this is a quite interesting story if you want to hear it. She was a body and came from Marengo County, Alabama. Her father and his brother went to law school at Lebanon, Cumberland Law School. Her father was Oliver Bennett Body. And he was 10 years older than his younger brother, John Exum Body Jr. And they both married girls from up here and took them to Marengo County, Alabama. Oliver Bennett Body married Josephine Rucker, who was the granddaughter of General Winchester Craigfont. And John Exum Body married Emily Donaldson Walton, who was later Walter, Mary Emily Donaldson from Davidson County. But anyway, she was a posthumous child because her father died several months before she was born. He and his brother both died a week or two of each other, fever down there. So in 1859. And then she grew up and married her first husband, and in 6 weeks, her husband died, her mother died, and her grandmother died. Her grandmother was the daughter of General Winchester, Craigford. They all died in 6 weeks. Well, she waited about 12, 13 years, and she was visiting Wynwood up here and met William Campbell Patterson, who was a Civil War veteran, a lot older than she, had children grown. And they married, and they had 2 children, and one of them was Dr. Rucker Patterson, Jimmy's father, and the other one was Mary Patterson Woodward, and her husband was a dentist here, Dr. Ralston Woodward. But anyway, Mamie had an interesting life.
Well, where was her house?
Right on the corner there.
Westland and East Main, southwest corner.
Southwest corner.
Mm-hmm.
Southwest corner.
So is that where, like, at one point, the Deadlands had a hardware store?
Yes,
Oh,
exactly.
And on the other
Next to
corner
that,
was
Deadlands,
those
yeah.
North sisters, or whoever they were.
Ramsey's.
Ramsey.
oh,
One
that's
was
where-
Miss North,
That's
yeah.
where the Woodards live.
Most of
Western
them,
Woodard.
well, 2 old maids live there, and then Miss
Yeah,
North,
also,
Sally
yeah.
North, yeah.
Wood.
I can tell you all about them too, we won't get into I'll talk to you about that. This is Dr. William Nicholas Lackey, MD. And he was World War I, but before that, he was a member of Bates Rifles. And they used to meet once a month out at Liberty Church, Methodist Church. And I have a picture in one of my books of Bates Rifles. And when they declared the Spanish-American War in 1898, they were so afraid they were going to be drafted, they disbanded. But he did go to World War I as a doctor in his 40s. But anyway, he was a pediatrician and educated at Philadelphia. And I have a picture of them doing an operation. He was in the room of somebody, and that picture has 3 ghosts in it. And I took it to be copied, and the machine wouldn't copy. And the woman looked at it, and she said, this has got ghosts in it. I said, shh. So I took it to Alan Haynes. He finally got a copy of it. He fooled the ghost. So, but their farm, his farm, he and his brother and sister owned the farm from Fairgrounds to Lock 4 Road and back. And all that land was theirs. The entrance to the cave, Lackey's cave, was over there near Lock 4 Road. That cave did not go, I don't care what you read in any book, it did not go under the city. Too many people explored it, including John Garrett.
I
Did
did
not-
too.
Yeah, and it didn't go under the city.
No,
No,
no.
that's a tale. People make up tales, you know. I started to do it today, but I've got too many truthful things I want to tell you first. This is Peter Vertreese's son-in-law, Dr. Jonathan Nathaniel Rucker. He was the only African-American officer from Sumner County in World War I. And as I told you, he practiced medicine out of the principal's office at Union High School. He was principal of the school and pastored the First Baptist Church. And his father-in-law, Peter Vertreese, got in touch with the Jewish Rosenwald Foundation in New York and had schools built all over the county. Well, Dr. Rucker took another step. He got money and bought buses. Students that were too far to come into Gallatin. And he had to pay for the maintenance because the county wouldn't. And he and Ms. Rucker kept a certain number of girls in their house with all the children they had, and they had bought a house next door and kept the boys next door. They were too far to be bused because it was the only school in the county. But you can talk to, how many people know Velma Brinkley? Okay, Velma lived in Mississippi, which was worse. She did not have a place to go to high school. She went to college to high school.
His house is still there, isn't it? Dr. Rucker's. Yeah, behind
I
the,
guess it is.
behind just a little white house behind the,
Well,
where the Wallace and Woodard lived, it's there. He
yeah,
was the
it'd be
principal of,
two blocks over, you know, it'd be on Bledsoe Street. It was on Bledsoe Street. I guess that house, yeah, that house is there.
Dr. Stewart, you think,
Dr. Stewart.
Principal Stewart.
He was principal of Union, Dr. Rucker. wasn't
Yeah, principal, that's right.
he? No, he lived
Okay.
there. He's still there.
This is the murderess,
It's all run down.
Anna Dennis Dotson. I'll show you the other side of it. Anna D.
Go read me
They didn't put her
about
death date on here. 1913, she had an affair with, they called him, nicknamed Ty Cobb. And he moved here from West Tennessee, and then he got too involved with her, so he took a job in Nashville on Broad Street in a barber shop. And she went down there with a muff and a pistol, went in there and they shot him and killed him, and waited for the police to come get her. And she didn't serve but 3 days in jail. But, and that's an interesting story. I won't go into that right now, but she was a character. When she was old, she lived at Westmore, and her husband died young, her son died young, grandson, they were all doctors. And the son died, and the daughter-in-law remarried to Mr. Caldwell, and she went and lived with them. And she had these big dogs, and she'd take a walk every afternoon, and everybody would get on the other side of the street when they saw her coming, because they were all scared to death of her. Silas Wright Love. This is when his son, Walter Scott Love, died. And Silas Wright Love was named after a governor of New York, and why they did that, I don't know. I mean, I don't know the connection. In the 1840s, early 1840s. And, because that's a handsome monument, a very big monument. But I'm trying to think what I need to tell you about. He was a saloon keeper here. That was the interesting thing about him. And I have some of the things that he had in that saloon. I've given some things away, but I still have some items that he had in that saloon over by the depot. And his house was across the street from the saloon. It was a Victorian house that's been torn down. Miss Vena Hamilton Stewart. This is the Stewart Monument. And Miss Vena, of course, was at a school named after her. She started teaching for Sonny Webb at Webb School in 1887. After she graduated from Howard Female College, came here in 1888. She was the first faculty at the Main Street High School that's still standing up here on East Main Street next to Regions Bank. That was the Main Street High School. That new book that's come out has the wrong history, and it begins with the right date, 1888 is when it was built, 1887, 88, and they opened in the fall of 88. And there was a house on that site when the city bought it. It was a city school. 16th of July, 1887, they bought it from Catherine Howell Moore, and 5 days later they approved the plans for that building. And a year later they moved in. So remember that when you read that book on ghosts, it has a different history. The owner of the building doesn't have a clue about the history of that building. But Miss Vena was on the first faculty there, and she was on the payroll here for 60 years. And her parents were cousins and married. She was from the family of Bailey Payton. And her mother was a Parker, so she's descended of Nathaniel Parker, who was an early settler here. But her sister Maud and her brother John William, and I don't know about Willie and Mary, but those two went nuts. And they had to keep Maud behind bars in the house. And Miss Rose had more education than Miss Vena, but she couldn't teach or do anything because she had to take care of them. And Maud killed John William, her brother. She hit him over the head with something and killed him one day. But anyway, Miss Vena had a hard life, but you'd never known it, the way she performed every day at teaching school. I mean, she was quite a character. Sidney Dayton Hicks, Commander PT 108. Kennedy was Commander PT 109. He was killed. He graduated Vanderbilt University. Editor of the Hustler. And we've done him in the cemetery tour twice. And the last time we did him, 3 years ago, I believe, the guy wore his uniform. his blue uniform. And after he was killed, Kennedy corresponded with his parents here. Weems, William Hatch Weems, co-founder of the world's largest apparel industry, UNESCO Corporation, on Fairview. Reverend Walter L. Shaw, he was a pastor of the First Baptist Church, Winchester Street. We did him in the cemetery tour this year, and Freddie Wilkerson portrayed him, did a wonderful job. I mean, he was really good. And I didn't even know Freddie before this, but Velma came up with him. She said he can do it, do a good job, and he did. He did a wonderful job. But he was pastor of Peter Vertreese's church, as I call it. And this is my step-grandparents. This David H. Dodd and Theodore Cassidy Dodd. And David was from a very brilliant family in Boston. His parents were graduated from MIT, both architects. He went to Wentworth Institute. 85 years ago, he built the first ski lift in the United States. And they had a big celebration this year up there in Vermont. I think it's Ryan's time. You've got 7 minutes.
7 minutes, we can do it.
You want some light, Ryan?
It doesn't matter, whatever y'all prefer. Lights are fine. All right, we'll see what we can do in 7 minutes. My name's Ryan. I'm the director at the Sumner County Museum here in Gallatin. And if I'd introduced Kenneth to you, I would have introduced him as the man who knows more dead people in Sumner County than anyone else. And I know it's true. And I'll tell you how I know. So, when we go and we plan the cemetery tour, we'll go out maybe a month in advance and we'll take one of those measuring wheels and we'll measure the route so we know how many luminaries we need to fill up. And when we do that, Kenneth and I meet. He doesn't bring anything with him. He just says, so-and-so's buried here. So we'll walk to that grave. All right, next is so-and-so, they're buried over here. We'll walk to their grave. And we do that. So this was my 4th cemetery tour, and that's how we've always done it. So he definitely knows the most dead people in Sumner County. And I think he's actually won an award for that. So it's definitely true. But when Grace introduced him, she did mention that he would tell you how we select our characters. And he didn't talk about that, so I'm going to tell you a little bit about how we select the characters. Somewhere around January, February, Kenneth calls me and he tells me, these are the people we're going to do in the cemetery tour this year. So he tells me, I say, sure, that sounds good, let's do that. And Kenneth will begin, he works on the scripts, he writes all the scripts for the tour. So the cemetery tour could not happen without someone like Kenneth really helping out there. So I really appreciate all that he does for the museum, for the county, for all our other historic sites. We'll talk just a little bit about kind of the planning, what goes into the cemetery tour. And like I said, we start January, February, selecting characters, writing the scripts. We'll usually have those finished up about May, and then we'll go through and Kenneth will usually have a good idea of who he wants to portray all of the characters. Now sometimes, and I know this year we had one person who actually portrayed one of their ancestors or relatives, so that's always really special, and I know the people that do that really enjoy it and really dig in. Sometimes we'll let them do the research and write their own scripts. Kenneth will approve those.
I give them the notes and then they rewrite it to 6%.
And so I know a lot of times Kenneth will send out the scripts, and what we like to do is we try to keep it right at 5 minutes per character. And so Kenneth will write a 12-minute script and tell the actors, make this a 5-minute script. And so they'll do that, and usually around June we'll start finding tour guides. It takes about 24 tour guides So we like to have someone in the front with a flashlight, someone in the rear. There's a lot of trip hazards in the cemetery. So about 24 tour guides, all volunteers. All of our actors are volunteers. And then in July, what we do to fund the cemetery tour is we sell sponsorships. Now these sponsorships can range anywhere from $100 up to $1,500 is our top sponsorship. So I think this year we actually sold somewhere between $9,000 and $10,000 in sponsorship that goes towards the costumes, supplies, things like that. Now, so that's in June, July, and then, we'll have to start thinking about supplies. Now, luckily, Wendy's donates all of our luminary bags, so they give us about 1,000 bags every year. This year, I think we filled up 800 and placed them throughout the route. The route this year was right at a little over 2/3 of a mile. So we put luminaries out every 12 feet in uniform, put sand, candles and all those. Garrett Brothers will deliver a load of sand for us. So we have a lot of community involvement, a lot of community partners that go into this event. And then I'll start making requests from different groups. Leisure Services, they'll donate 2 to 4 golf carts for us to use for the tour. This year, Charlie's Golf Carts, they donated 4 golf carts that we could use for people with disabilities. So if you have trouble navigating the tour by foot, we have, we make accommodations for that. And let's see, what else do? We do most of our advertising, media. We still put an ad in the paper. In last year, 2018, I got a grant for the cemetery tour that we could use for marketing. So I put out an ad on Facebook, and on Facebook you can actually target your audience. So you might target people that like history, but you can do it in a radius of 25 miles from Gallatin or Nashville, Murfreesboro, Hopkinsville. And last year, I know we actually had one lady who traveled all the way from Washington, D.C. just for the cemetery tour. She had ties to the Trousdale family, and it was a pleasure to meet her, but she came all the way here for the cemetery tour from D.C. And so people are seeing that, in other areas around, even outside of the state, thanks to social media. I had someone call me from Murfreesboro, and he said, "There's no way this is the 22nd annual tour. I know about these things, and I've never heard of this tour." And I said, "Well, this is the 22nd year." And I said, "This was last year." And he said, "Okay, well, I'm coming." So I know we had people from Murfreesboro, Hopkinsville, Kentucky, Nashville. So we're starting to draw a crowd from, outside Sumner County. And we actually, I think last year was our record number of attendees. We had over 1,400 people come and tour. And if you were there last year, you knew that the line went from halfway down Cemetery all the way to the stop sign at West Smith Street, I think, and then wrap all the way back around up to our booth. So next year we might do some adjustments with our ticket sales and maybe sell time slots or something like that to try to decrease that wait time. Because I know if you came this year, I know there were some people who said, "We waited for 2 hours to do that tour," which is a long time. So we'll be working on maybe doing some adjustments to alleviate that. But what really sticks out to me about this event is how much community support we get. I mentioned Garrett Brothers and the Sand, Wendy's and the Luminaries, all of our sponsors. But we also have day of, it takes about 70 individuals to make the cemetery tour happen. I'm the only paid employee. Everyone else that's part of the cemetery tour is a volunteer. And so between your actors, your tour guides, people driving golf carts, the scouts who come up and fill the luminaries up for us and then go out and place them, they monitor them throughout the night, they light them all for us. About 70 individuals. So I think that really speaks volumes to how well the community supports this event. And then we have all of our actors get fitted and pick out their costumes. Some people have their own costumes, we let them wear those. But some people do get fitted. And then day of, I think I get started about 7 a.m. We have a booth on Main Street for the Square Festival, or Main Street Festival in the fall. And then we go to the cemetery, we take all the shepherd hooks, all the lanterns, and we go out and we set the route up between 9 and 10 o'clock. And at 10 o'clock, all the scouts show up, they come in, fill up 800 luminaries, and then around noon we go, we place them all out on the route. And the streets close at 3, we're set up by 4 and ready to go. So it takes a lot, day of to get that ready, make that event happen, have to get the roads closed and all that there. And this year, we did something a little different. The night before, we had a VIP meet and greet party with the actors at historic Stonewall, or formerly John Garrett's residence. And this year, I think we had about 75 people come. All of our actors were there in costume. It was a great way to kind of meet them and learn about them. And we had music and food, and so it was a really good time. And if you bought a VIP ticket, you got to skip the line at the cemetery tour the next day. So we're trying to expand on that. We've actually branded the cemetery tour as the Spirits of Sumner Candlelight Cemetery Tour. So we've kind of taken that. We've actually added another event last year. It actually falls the Friday after the cemetery tour, so it keeps me really busy in the month of October. But we had a Historic Haunts bus tour. And last year was the first year, and this year was the second. And this year we actually had 2 55-person charter buses, and then 1 VIP bus that was actually donated from All Access Coach Leasing. So one of the really nice country music star buses that we had to use. And we went after dark and toured the Palace Theater, Trousdale Place, Rosemont, Stonewall, Craigfont, and Wynwood. And so, a lot of people that are interested in ghosts and spirits and things like that take this tour, but then the tour is probably about 80% history, and then we throw in about 20% of the, spooky stories and things that we've heard or may have seen, or different things like that. So it's pretty popular. We've sold that event out both years that we've done that. And this year we're also adding another event that's November the 9th at Stonewall, and it's going to be the Christmas Spirits of Sumner. And so we'll have hors d'oeuvres passed. It'll be a really nice event. We'll have some people there, folks in period costume telling some more of these stories like you would hear at the cemetery tour. And I will tell you that the story about Miss Dodson, the murderous lady who killed her, boyfriend or undercover lover, so to say, we'll be telling her story and his story. So we've got tickets on sale for that, November the 9th, 6 o'clock, and I think my 7 minutes are past. So does anybody have any questions for me? Well, thank you all for being here. I really, I'm been privileged to be part of the tour and able to keep something going that I think is really special.
We're privileged to have him.
Thank you.